has a serious problem on their hands right now. You see, we're currently facing the highest levels of inflation we've seen in over 40 years, and because of that, we've seen mortgage rates rise drastically, we've seen housing affordability plummet, and because of that, that's all led to this point of the housing market facing the first signs of a housing crash really since 2008. The bad news is, unfortunately, it's only going to get worse from this point. You see, the more information we get, the worse the future outlook of the housing market seems to get, and this last week was no exception. Things are not panning out like the Fed anticipated, so I'm going to explain exactly what's going on with this, where we're at in this housing market correction, and what the future looks like for the housing market based on the latest data we got this last week. But before I get started, do me a favor and support the channel by smashing that like button. If you haven't already done so, definitely subscribe, hit that notification bell to watch more content like this, and with that said, let's jump into it. The Fed's top priority has been inflation ever since we started hitting 30-year and 40-year highs earlier this year. With the average American struggling to keep up with the cost of living going up, the Fed had no choice but to prioritize the average everyday American versus the Americans that are invested into stocks and real estate. The problem is their plan just simply isn't working. They've already raised interest rates 3% so far this year. That's the federal funds rate. They've also started offloading their balance sheets, doubling the speed at which they offload their balance sheets, and now all of this has contributed to mortgage rates more than doubling since the month of January. Now, yes, that part was anticipated, that mortgage rates would go up, that the housing market would slow down, start correcting, that the stock market would probably start to plummet. All of that was expected to happen. But what's not taking place is inflation is proving to be much harder to battle than initially anticipated, and so we're actually seeing the numbers struggle to go down as fast as they would have liked to have seen. You see, at the moment, inflation is at 8.3% as of August, which is not that much better than 8.5% in July, and that's what skewed numbers really, because gas is artificially bringing down the overall total inflation number. For one, President Biden has been releasing 1 million barrels a day from our strategic petroleum reserves, and this has been artificially bringing down gas prices to the tune of over 25% from peak levels. And even with that taking place, we're still seeing total inflation up 0.1% month over month. The second sign that inflation is really not going down is that core inflation actually went up. We saw it go from 5.9% year over year in July up to 6.3%, and core inflation is basically your costs of goods and services, not counting your food and energy sectors like gasoline. So based on that alone, you can already see that inflation isn't really going down that much, but in reality, it's actually about to get a lot worse. For starters, the 1 million barrels a day that's getting released from our reserves is going to stop at the end of October, and what that's going to do is we're going to see gas prices start to go up again, and that's going to affect the total inflation number. As right now, if we're already seeing 0.1% month over month growth, imagine what it does when gas prices that are currently down 10.6% month over month is now going up 10%. Secondly, student loan forgiveness has still not gone into effect, and that's another $500 billion that's being spent on forgiving student loan debt. So that's only going to add again more upward pressure on inflation. The third thing to consider is owner's equivalent rent. This is essentially when they ask homeowners, what would you rent your house out for minus utilities and furniture, and the homeowner gives their best guess as to what they would rent their house for. Now, because they don't really understand what their house is capable of being rented out for, since they're not in the real estate industry, they often end up underreporting, especially when you're seeing massive inflation in rents like we have been seeing. So the rent information that the government's been reporting has been drastically lagging, and now that rents are finally declining nationwide, as far as Realtor.com is reporting, the government statistics that we're actually getting is starting to go up because they're starting to realize, these homeowners, the rents are actually going up now. So once we see these rent numbers come into effect, it's going to hurt the total inflation numbers because rent makes up about 1/4 of the total inflation number. Now, the reason why this is a problem is as long as the Fed sees those numbers for inflation coming in high, they're going to continue continue to fight inflation until it gets down to those 2% levels. So because of that, that means we can anticipate it's going to be a longer than expected battle. They may have to get more aggressive as a result of these numbers continuing to stay high, even despite the rate hikes, despite the offloading of the balance sheet. It won't be working as there's more upward pressure coming on inflation in many different aspects. And so it creates a serious problem because as the Fed stays aggressive, we continue to see mortgage rates go up. We continue to see housing affordability plummet, and as a result, we will continue to see house prices decline. Now, if that's not enough to be concerned about, PCE data just came back this last week. Now, PCE stands for Personal Consumption Expenditure. This essentially shows you how much consumption is taking place amongst consumers in today's economy, and this matters because if you're going to lower inflation, the whole point of raising interest rates and doing all those things is to lower demand for these goods and services so that inflation will come down, because it's a supply-demand thing, right? As there's less demand going towards these goods, people will have to lower the prices of their services in order to still sell those services. And so this can be a problem if consumption stays high, and that's exactly what we saw in this last week's numbers. Is core PCE was expected to be at 4.7%, actually came in at 4.9%, which was actually higher than it was last month, which was actually pretty interesting to see because as they've hiked interest rates, you would expect that demand would start to go down. Well, in this case, good news was bad news, because normally it's a good thing to see the economy is doing well and people are spending money and revenues are up and all that stuff is great normally. But in this case, it's bad news because as long as things are doing well, the Fed has to continue to hike interest rates. They have to continue to get more aggressive in order to achieve their ultimate goal of lowering inflation. Because reality is we can't get inflation under control until demand starts to go down. So as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts taking place, but at the center of it all, it really comes down to inflation. As long as inflation is a problem, we're going to continue to see pain in the housing market and the stock market. And what we know right now is that inflation is a harder battle to face than initially anticipated, and the future of inflation looks like there's a lot of problems on the way between lagging rent numbers, student loan forgiveness, and oil prices continuing to go up in the future. But even where we are at right now today, the housing market really needs to correct to where mortgage rates have gone to. We're currently sitting at about roughly 7% levels, which is over a 2% increase in just the last 2 months. So naturally, with mortgage rates going up, we're going to see more of a drop in demand taking place, which brings us back to what I talked about last week, this battle going on we have between supply and demand. You see, we talked about this last week about how new listings have been plummeting, and yet at the same time demand has been plummeting, and those have opposite effects on the housing market. Obviously, as there's less listings on the market, there's less supply, there's less inventory available. That's going to create more upward pressure on prices, yet as there's less demand, that puts more downward pressure. So they're both kind of going against each other, and it's ultimately a battle of who's going to flinch first between buyers and sellers. Well, as of the latest update from the Mortgage Bankers Association, we saw that demand went down for mortgage purchase applications another 0.4% week over week, and that was actually down 29% year over year. We're also seeing some soft signs of demand weakening across the country, as Redfin reported that touring activity is actually down 18% year over year, and the search on Google for the term homes for sale is actually down 33% year over year. Now, the reason we're seeing all this take place is tied to affordability, and Redfin actually reported that just in the last 6 weeks alone, we've seen mortgage payments on average go up by 15%. So that means for a median priced home, we're seeing an extra $337 a month. Now, because there's still this standoff between sellers and buyers taking place, we're still seeing home sales down about 20% down, according to the National Association of Realtors, but they also just released their pending sales data this last week, and we saw that pending sales are down 2% month over month between July and August, and in addition to that, we also saw that year over year, they're down over 24%. Now, pending sales are a great indicator to use to look to the future of home sales, and based on what we're seeing with pending sales, it looks like home sales are only going to continue to decline. Now, that's the demand side. On the supply side, when it comes to new listings coming on the market, over the past several weeks, we've been seeing a constant decline week over week over week until these last couple of weeks that we recently got the data for. They're showing that new listings are actually starting to stabilize. Now, this could actually be a sign that demand destruction is finally outpacing chasing new listings, that buyers are essentially not flinching, that sellers are the one that are going to have to give way to the buyers. In addition to that, we're also seeing more significant signs of house price corrections on the way. For one, median days on market continues to go up. We're currently at 31 median days on market. We were as low as 16.5 earlier in the year, and the reality is over the past several weeks, we've been seeing it continue to rise about an extra day every single week. Secondly, price drops are back, especially as mortgage rates are starting to go back up again. We're starting to see an increase drastically taking place with price drops as we're reaching new highs in this cycle. We recently hit 7.6% on the weekly levels. You multiply that by 4 and we're actually hitting over 30% of all listings are experiencing a price drop of some kind, and that's a nationwide number. And finally, we're continuing to see the months of supply build up as we finally hit 3 months of supply on the market nationwide, which is the highest levels we've reached since July of 2020. Now, we're still going to need to see some higher numbers than that in order to see some significant price corrections take place, but overall, if you look at the big picture here, we're on the right path as far as things are going right now. Between mortgage rates rising, the Fed continuing to stay aggressive, inflation being a harder problem to fight than anticipated, and new listings finally starting to stabilize potentially. All of this will contribute to the months of supply continuing to build up. So overall, this is the reality taking place right now. We're entering into the second phase of this housing correction, and on a positive note, for those who have been wanting to get into the housing market, there's going to be some better buying opportunities ahead as house prices continue to decline into 2023 and 2024. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did and you gained some value from today's video, do me a favor and smash that like button, and if you haven't already done so, definitely subscribe and hit that notification bell to watch more content like this. Also, let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Finally, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Out of State Investor, and if you enjoyed today's video, I'm going to highly recommend checking out one of these two videos over here. And with that said, I'll see you guys on the next one.